If you are caught in that loop of stress, stubborn belly fat, and nights where you are exhausted but still wide awake, then pay attention because what I am about to share is for you. There is 1 tablespoon that can calm cortisol in 5 minutes flat, and I will be direct with you. Most doctors hate this approach because it is natural, it is inexpensive, and it actually works. By the end of this video, you are not just going to know what that tablespoon is, you are also going to understand why your cortisol spikes, how it destroys your sleep, your weight, and your mood, and exactly how to fix it fast. So let us get started. My name is David Mercer. I have spent 28 years studying aging patterns and hormone dysfunction in over 9,000 patients between the ages of 65 and 95. And in all those years, one of the most consistently misunderstood hormones I have encountered is cortisol. My patients come in thinking they understand it. They have read about it online. They have heard about stress hormones. But what almost none of them understand is that having too high a cortisol and having too low a cortisol are both deeply unhealthy. And they can both make you feel exactly the same way. Let me explain. High cortisol is often the beginning of low cortisol. When cortisol runs too high, your body retains fluid weight. Your immune system becomes dysregulated. You feel like you are in a constant state of stress. Everything feels inflamed, and that is because it is. Chronically elevated cortisol is genuinely inflammatory. It is bad for brain cells. It is bad for bone tissue. And eventually the pituitary gland, which does not like high cortisol precisely because of that inflammation, will stop sending the signal that tells your adrenal glands to produce cortisol. At that point, cortisol goes flat, or it swings wildly. Some parts of the day it is dangerously low. Other parts of the day it spikes unexpectedly. You cannot handle stress. You feel dizzy standing up. You retain fluid in your ankles and legs. You feel overwhelmed by small things. And you cannot understand why, because nothing dramatic has happened. Here is what makes this especially confusing. Both high cortisol and low cortisol make you feel like you are in a stress state. This is one of the most important things I can tell you. A lot of people assume they have high cortisol. We test them and it is actually low, or it is dysregulated, meaning the curve is wrong. The numbers may technically fall within range, but they are not landing at the right times of day, and that matters enormously. What does a healthy cortisol curve look like? Cortisol should be high in the morning, roughly 70 to 75% of its daily output concentrated in the morning hours. That is when you wake with energy. That is when your brain is alert. That is when exercise benefits your body rather than stressing it further. By noon, cortisol should be declining, down to around 50%. In the evening it should be at 25 to 30%, and at bedtime it should be at its lowest, 15 to 25%. When cortisol is at its lowest in the evening, melatonin can rise. That is the signal your body uses to fall asleep and stay asleep. High cortisol in the evening directly suppresses melatonin, which is why people who are chronically stressed lie in bed exhausted but cannot switch off. Their cortisol is still high when it should be almost gone. They feel tired. They feel wired, both at the same time, and they cannot understand why rest does not come naturally anymore. Here is what makes the salivary cortisol test so valuable compared to a standard blood test. A blood cortisol test gives you a single snapshot. It tells you what the level was at one moment in time, which is helpful but profoundly incomplete. The salivary test, taken at 4 or 5 points across the day, gives you the curve. And the curve is the diagnosis. You can have cortisol levels that appear technically in range on every individual measurement, but still show a completely abnormal pattern. The person who wakes exhausted, crashes in the afternoon, and lies awake at midnight may have perfectly normal cortisol on a single morning blood draw, which is why I almost never rely on blood cortisol alone. The shape of the curve across the day tells me far more than any single number can. Now, here is the piece nobody tells you. Cortisol is a steroid hormone, and steroid hormones are synthesized from animal fat, specifically from cholesterol. Your body cannot make cortisol out of avocado oil. It cannot make it from olive oil or coconut oil. Even though those are called healthy fats, they are not cholesterol-derived steroids. They do not provide the raw material for cortisol production. For that, your body needs animal fat, which is exactly why one of the first things I look at when a patient has cortisol dysregulation is what they are eating, and specifically whether they are eating enough fat from animal sources. The liver always makes some cholesterol because it is that important. Cholesterol is the foundation for all your steroid hormones, including cortisol, estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone. But if you layer chronic stress on top of an animal fat deficient diet, your liver cannot keep up. You burn through your cortisol reserves faster than you can replenish them, and then the whole cascade starts to fall apart. What else disrupts the cortisol curve? Carbohydrates, for one. Carbohydrates are stimulants. Many people do not think of them that way, but they act on the body similarly to other stimulants. They raise cortisol. Alcohol raises cortisol. Cannabis raises cortisol. Overexercising, particularly going to the gym at 4 in the morning on no food, raises cortisol. Chronic undereating raises cortisol. Fasting done aggressively without fat raises cortisol. All of these things that people are told are healthy behaviors can, in someone with already stressed adrenals, actively make things worse. This is not to say movement or dietary discipline is bad. It is to say that if your cortisol system is already struggling, these inputs are demands you cannot currently meet. And every demand placed on a depleted cortisol system draws down a reserve that is already running low. The body's response to stimulants is a physiological stress reaction. When you drink alcohol and feel relaxed, what is actually happening is a cortisol release, followed by the sedating effect of the alcohol masking it. The next morning, the cortisol borrowed for that relaxation response has to be replaced. For a system with healthy adrenal reserves, this is manageable. For a system that has been running on deficit for years, each borrowed cortisol response leaves the curve lower the next day. This is the accumulation I see in patients who describe feeling good for a while on a certain habit and then, over months or years, gradually feeling worse. The system was accommodating, and then it could not accommodate anymore. When cortisol is dysregulated, thyroid function also suffers. High cortisol reduces the conversion of T4 to T3. T3 is the active thyroid hormone that actually does the work. T4 is the storage form. When that conversion is blocked by chronically high cortisol, the thyroid cannot function properly even when the gland itself is intact. The downstream results include hair loss, poor metabolism, digestive issues, increased autoimmune risk, and the general sense that your body is simply not working the way it should, despite everything you are doing. Hypothyroidism itself then creates a physiological stress state, which raises cortisol further, and elevated cortisol then further suppresses thyroid function. It becomes a loop. Two systems that should regulate each other instead drive each other deeper into dysfunction. I have seen this pattern hundreds of times. The patient is told her thyroid is fine because the numbers are in range. She is put on HRT because her symptoms are blamed on menopause. She does not improve. She gets worse. Because neither intervention addressed the actual root, which was cortisol dysregulation that had been building for 20 or 30 years. And this brings up a question I get constantly. How did this happen? Was it sudden, or was it gradual? For almost everyone, it is gradual. It is decades of accumulation. The cortisol system responds to every demand placed on it. A diet low in fat from adolescence, overexercising, undereating, chronic caloric restriction, years of intermittent fasting done incorrectly, traumatic experiences, surgeries. Any surgery creates a massive cortisol surge because your body reacts to being cut the same way it reacts to a tiger attack. It sends cortisol flooding through the system as a protective mechanism, which is why general anesthesia includes medications specifically designed to suppress cortisol levels to prevent the patient from going into shock. Surgeries can trigger or dramatically accelerate cortisol dysregulation. Patients who were functioning adequately before a major surgical procedure sometimes emerge with dramatically changed hormonal profiles afterward. I have seen this. It is more common than most physicians acknowledge. So how do you know if your cortisol is dysregulated? Symptoms can be deceptive because high and low cortisol overlap so significantly. But some patterns to watch for include waking at 2, 3, or 4 in the morning and being unable to fall back asleep. Afternoon energy crashes. Hot flashes or a sense of sudden heat that is not related to temperature. Difficulty handling stress that used to feel manageable. Feeling wired but tired at the same time. These are all signs that the cortisol curve may be dysregulated, that it is peaking at the wrong times and bottoming out when it should be available. The most accurate way to assess this is a salivary cortisol test that measures levels at 4 or 5 different points throughout the day: morning, noon, afternoon, evening, and before bed. Blood cortisol tests only give you a single snapshot and miss the curve entirely. If you pursue this test, be careful interpreting the ranges. Labs often present wide reference ranges that technically allow for significant dysfunction to appear normal on paper. What you are looking for is the curve, whether cortisol is highest in the morning and lowest at night, and whether the transitions are smooth. You can be symptomatic while appearing in range if the shape of your curve is wrong. Now let us talk about what you can actually do. And this brings us to the tablespoon. The cortisol curve starts rising at around 2 in the morning. Your body is attempting to generate the energy it will need for waking. It does this partly through gluconeogenesis, the liver's process of making glucose from stored resources. In a person with healthy cortisol regulation, this process is smooth and gradual. You sleep through it. You wake feeling rested. But in a person with cortisol dysregulation, this overnight process becomes erratic. Cortisol spikes unpredictably. Blood sugar may swing. And the result is waking at 2 or 3 in the morning feeling alert, anxious, or simply unable to stay asleep. Here is what I recommend to patients who experience this, and what the science supports. A small amount of animal fat before bed. 1 tablespoon. Not a full meal, not a plate of food. 1 tablespoon of butter, tallow, or ghee, taken at the bedside or in the minutes before lying down. Here is the mechanism. Animal fat is cholesterol-rich. Cortisol is synthesized from cholesterol. When you provide a small amount of animal fat to the system before sleep, you are giving the adrenal glands direct access to the raw material they need for that overnight cortisol production cycle. If your cortisol is running too high, the fat appears to have a calming anti-inflammatory effect. If your cortisol is too low, the fat provides substrate to produce more. The scientific literature on dietary fat and cortisol regulation supports this bidirectional effect. Animal fat is a natural modulator, not a stimulant. It does not spike the system. It steadies it. This is why I call it the bedside butter hack. Not because I invented the concept, but because it describes exactly what it is. A tablespoon of fat at the bedside, taken at the moment when the cortisol curve is beginning its overnight climb. What specifically? Butter is what most of my patients use and find easiest. Raw butter, cold or room temperature, 1 tablespoon. You can place it under the tongue and let it melt. It absorbs quickly and the effect is often noticeable within minutes. A sense of calm, a feeling of the nervous system settling, a loosening of the jaw and the shoulders. This is not placebo. This is your adrenal glands receiving what they need to stop sending the alarm signal that was keeping you awake or waking you too early. The adrenals sense the available cholesterol. The pituitary moderates its output. The cortisol curve begins to flatten toward where it should be overnight, and you sleep. Ghee works similarly, as does beef tallow. Any solid animal fat at room temperature will serve the purpose. The only caution is to avoid consuming fat that is heated to liquid form at night, as very warm fat taken internally can cause digestive discomfort or diarrhea. Cold or room temperature is ideal. The fat does not need to be a significant quantity. More is not better here. 1 tablespoon is the target, enough to provide substrate without giving the digestive system significant work to do during sleep hours. I have witnessed this bedside fat practice transform the sleep of patients who had been struggling for years. Women who woke every night at 2:30, reliably, for 3 years. Gone within the first week of consistent bedside butter, not gradually over months, within days. Men who could not sleep past 4 in the morning and assumed it was simply their age, sleeping until 6:30, waking with energy they had not felt in years. The pattern is consistent enough that I now recommend this to almost every patient who presents with cortisol-related sleep disruption, and I am rarely disappointed by the result. For patients who wake in the middle of the night and cannot fall back asleep, I give the same recommendation. Take the tablespoon. Lie back down. Give your body time to use it. It takes a few minutes for the adrenal glands to register the available substrate and begin moderating the cortisol curve. Do not expect instant sleep. Expect a gradual softening of the alertness within 10 to 15 minutes, a warming, a heaviness in the eyes, and be consistent. Night after night, the effect compounds as the adrenal glands begin to learn they have reliable access to raw material at the right moment in the overnight cycle. Now let us talk about what happens when people clean up their diet and cut the processed foods. Because this is critically important, and almost nobody warns patients about it in advance. When you remove refined carbohydrates, processed grains, seed oils, and sugar from your diet and shift toward an animal fat-based approach, your body undergoes a transition. For the first few days, you may feel genuinely terrible, tired, foggy, irritable, sometimes weak. People assume something is wrong, they panic and reach back for the processed food. This is a mistake. That feeling is not your body rejecting the approach. It is your body flushing electrolytes. When you dramatically reduce carbohydrates, your kidneys stop retaining sodium at the same rate. Water follows sodium. Your body rapidly dumps significant amounts of fluid, and with it goes sodium, potassium, and magnesium. These are not just minerals. They are the electrical switches that run your hormonal system, stabilize your energy, support thyroid function, and keep insulin sensitivity calibrated. A sudden drop in these electrolytes produces exactly the symptoms I just described: low energy, headaches, muscle cramps, brain fog. It is not carbohydrate withdrawal in any traditional sense. It is electrolyte loss. And it is entirely manageable if you know it is coming. The solution is straightforward. Salt your food generously. Add quality salt to your drinking water. Focus specifically on sodium, potassium, and magnesium. If you are consistently eating animal proteins and fats and still feeling the energy drop and cramps, electrolyte supplementation can be valuable. Look for products with no sugar, no flavoring agents, no stevia, and no additives. Just raw mineral electrolytes. The reason purity matters here is that you are trying to support a clean hormonal environment. Anything that triggers a taste receptor or an insulin response undermines that goal. Pure, unflavored electrolytes dissolved in water or added to your food address the deficit without interfering with the hormonal cleanup you are attempting. The timeline for real cortisol improvement is not overnight. It takes approximately 3 to 4 months of consistent dietary change and bedside fat practice before you can reliably retest and see the curve improving. This is because the adrenal glands themselves are not the broken part in most cases. The pituitary gland, which sends the signal telling the adrenals to produce cortisol, is what needs time to recalibrate. The adrenals are often perfectly functional. They are simply waiting for correct instructions. Restoring the right inputs, fat, reduction of stimulants, electrolyte support, sleep hygiene, gives the pituitary the stable environment it needs to begin signaling correctly again. There is one more piece that I consider second only to dietary change in terms of impact on cortisol. Sleep hygiene, specifically protection from blue light in the evening. Your body's circadian clock is anchored to light. Bright light in the morning signals cortisol to rise. Darkness in the evening signals cortisol to fall and melatonin to rise. When you expose your eyes to the blue spectrum light emitted by phones, tablets, computers, and televisions after dark, you are sending your circadian clock a daylight signal at exactly the moment it should be receiving a darkness signal. Cortisol stays elevated, melatonin is suppressed, sleep onset is delayed, sleep quality is reduced, and the next morning you wake with lower cortisol reserves than you should have, which means you start the day already behind. The simplest intervention is to stop using screens after dark, or when that is not possible, to use blue-blocking glasses in the evening hours. Red-tinted lenses provide the most complete protection against the blue spectrum. These are not a sleep gimmick. They are a light-filtering tool that supports the same circadian biology your ancestors maintained naturally by living with fire, which emits almost no blue light, and sleeping when the sun went down. Modern lighting and screens are a profound mismatch with the biology we inherited, and the cortisol consequences are real and measurable. So, let me bring this together. If your cortisol is dysregulated, here is the sequence. First, add animal fat to your diet, targeting roughly 80% of your caloric intake from fat-based animal sources and keeping protein at 20% as net protein. Remove stimulants including refined carbohydrates, alcohol, and overexercising. Second, take 1 tablespoon of butter, ghee, or tallow at bedside before sleep and keep it available for any waking episodes. Third, manage electrolytes actively during any dietary transition. Salt generously, consider a clean electrolyte product with no sugar and no additives if needed. Fourth, protect your eyes from blue light after dark. Go to bed at a consistent time. Keep your room dark and cool. Fifth, retest your salivary cortisol at 3 to 4 months and track the curve, not just the numbers. Your hormones are not broken, they are responding. And they respond fast when you give them what they need. If this video helped you understand cortisol even a little better, I genuinely want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me how long you have been struggling with sleep disruption, stubborn weight, or the stress and fatigue that nothing has touched. And tell me if you are going to try the bedside tablespoon tonight. I read every comment and want to know how this works for you. And if you want to go deeper on the connection between cortisol, thyroid function, and the dietary foundation that supports both, I will have that video waiting for you right here on screen. Dr. David Mercer. Now I want to address something that comes up constantly in practice. Why does cortisol dysregulation feel impossible to fix when you are already trying so many things? And the honest answer is usually one of 2 reasons. Either the dietary foundation is still incomplete, meaning not enough animal fat, still too many stimulants, or both. Or the person is trying to fix the symptom without addressing the system. Sleep medications force sedation, but do not regulate the cortisol curve. The next night, the same curve produces the same waking. Melatonin supplements may help some people fall asleep, but do not address why melatonin was suppressed in the first place. Stress management techniques are valuable, but work at the level of perceived stress, not adrenal raw material supply. All of these approaches work around the problem. The animal fat approach, combined with removing stimulants, works at the root. The other question I hear often is whether this approach only applies to women. It does not. Men with cortisol dysregulation often present with lower testosterone, energy loss, and muscle decline rather than weight retention. But the underlying mechanism is identical. Cortisol is a steroid hormone synthesized from cholesterol in both sexes. The stimulants that disrupt the curve are the same. The bedside fat practice works for men equally. What differs is the downstream hormone cascade, which skews toward testosterone in men and estrogen and progesterone in women. The upstream intervention is the same regardless. Adolescents are also significantly affected, more than most people realize. Cortisol and adrenal function are especially important during puberty because that is when DHEA production ramps up significantly. If the dietary foundation is inadequate during adolescence, the adrenal hormone production during those critical years is compromised. The downstream consequences may not be obvious for a decade or 2, but the pattern I see in adults with cortisol dysregulation in their 40s and 50s almost always traces to dietary habits and stress exposures that began much earlier. The accumulation is long. The correction, once begun, is faster than most people expect, but only if the foundational work is done. One final thing I want to address: iodine. Iodine is required by almost every tissue in the body, not just the thyroid. The adrenal glands need iodine to function properly. Chronically elevated cortisol increases iodine utilization, meaning a stressed adrenal system burns through iodine faster than usual. This creates another loop. High cortisol depletes iodine. Depleted iodine impairs adrenal and thyroid function. Adrenal impairment raises cortisol. Adequate iodine from food, particularly seafood and organ meats, supports the entire system. It is not a magic fix, but it is a piece that is often missing. Cortisol dysregulation is not a mystery. It is not a life sentence. It is a physiological imbalance with identifiable causes and addressable solutions. The tablespoon before bed delivers the precise raw material your adrenal glands need at the precise time of night when they need it most. Combined with removing stimulants, rebuilding the dietary foundation on animal fat, supporting electrolytes through dietary transitions, and protecting your circadian clock in the evening, you have a complete protocol. Give it 3 to 4 months of genuine consistency, retest, and let the curve tell you what it shows. Your hormones are not broken. They are responding to what you give them. Give them the right inputs, consistently and deliberately, and they respond. And if you want to go deeper on the connection between cortisol, thyroid function, and the dietary foundation supporting both, I will have that video right here on screen waiting for you next.